Hello and welcome to Digital Signage Explored. With me today, I have the pleasure of welcoming PeterCritchley from Trison. Thank you very much for joining, Peter.
Hello, Tim. Really nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me onto the podcast.
No problem at all. I really appreciate you taking the time. We had the opportunity to kind of bump into each other for the first time during ISE, which is where a couple of these episodes have come from. But could you give us a bit of an overview of Trison and your role in the company?
Of course, Trison is Europe's largest digital integrator for the experiential in-store, in physical spaces implementation. And we are experts in creating meaningful experiences that are memorable and that last long in whether it's customer experiences or corporate experiences or stadiums. And my role is the UK CEO, so I head up the UK subsidiary, and we've been doing this for about 28 years now.
Fantastic. So I think given your role and given what Trison work on, I think it's a really good opportunity to talk about kind of content strategies for building and places and location. I know you and I had a brief kind of introductory call, and that was where we just kind of naturally progressed to. What does that mean? Could you kind of expand a little bit on that and what the meaning behind, why we're not just putting up a screen any old which way and what the value is there?
I think the journey that digital signage has been on over the last 10, 20 years and longer, it's natural for people to think that it's a screen on a wall delivering content. And you and I have, and everyone else I'm sure has heard, content is king, and it's really important. Of course it is. It's vital. It's really, really important. But for that reason, it's really important that we think about where that content is going to be relevant and how it's going to be relevant in the spaces that it's shown. And that should lead the technology choices and the placement decisions that we make to deliver the message that we are trying to convey to the people that are going to be observing it on our digital surfaces. So the most effective implementations that any of us will see are ones that have been carefully designed into the physical spaces that they occupy. We can think about Salesforce Tower and the lift entranceways with the waterfall cascading. And that's a perfect example of a brilliantly designed physical installation implementation with an excellent content strategy behind it that carefully uses the space. And the other piece that really matters, and that again is linked to content and the physical space, is what you might call architectural speed. So when we think about how content plays and how movement is exhibited in that content, it needs to relate to the journey and the movement that people are undertaking at that moment. A classic example would be London Underground and the escalators, where content moves at the same time as the escalators. So it's relevant to you as you're stood there. If it was going twice the speed, it wouldn't work. And if it was going half the speed, it wouldn't work. And the same is true for a lobby or a retail space. If you've got a road on the outside where cars and buses and people are moving, it makes sense to try and use that speed, that movement in your content design to make it feel contiguous to the space that you're in.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've had mention of that, but the typical way that it gets built out to us as we talk about you're in a waiting room, then you've got more time versus you're looking at digital out of home, then you've got next to no time. It was Jeremy Gavin actually from Screenfeed that mentioned that kind of example. And I like the way you kind of put it into context where you go, well, actually, spend half a day and watch people walk through the space and go, how long do we have here? What's the total duration before people are completely gone, where we can interact with them and give them the information that they need, and even working in down that way. And you've obviously mentioned things about building spaces and locations, and the example that you gave, I think, was one of those kind of big and bold ones, but there's tons that are less large form factor and more kind of just hyper focused and hyper targeted that makes a lot of sense to the space. Have you got any examples of that you've been involved with, or particular case studies that you point to that go, this was a perfect example of digital signage done right?
If you think around customer journeys or guest journeys, that's the starting point for where you're fixing a problem. You're
Hmm.
addressing a need, or you're helping people make a decision, right? And that's what this technology should be doing. It's not a vanity project. I mean, there are
Right.
vanity projects, right? Of course, there's lots of examples of these amazing wow projects that you just think, crikey, there's more budget than strategic planning here,
Right.
but that's great. The ones that I think are really exciting are where you're changing the relationship that customers have with a brand, and a problem that they have. So a good example is IKEA. We did some work with them in the last 5 or 6 years where we delivered a rug size projection system that would
I
project.
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really simple problem because the rugs, as you will know from any visit to an IKEA that you've made,
Mm.
in the shelves, and people pull them out and they open them out, and they will obviously the area then gets left quite messy sometimes, or they just buy it because they think, sure, it'll be fine. I've got 1.5 meters, that's absolutely fine. And actually,
Hmm.
they get it home and they find it's too big. So there was a returns issue, there was a store tidiness issue, there was a customer experience issue. And by
Mm.
using a projection system that projected it onto the floor at the right size with some furniture if you wanted to, and
Hmm.
being able to enter the specific product number that you were interested in, it would show you that on the floor. It reduced returns to almost nothing in that
That's
store.
crazy.
And the the co-worker experience and the customer experience was amplified enormously. It became a bit of retail
Hmm.
theatre, and that was using the space, that was using the floor in that textiles area for
Hmm.
more than just walking across or a bit of vinyl, and it made it much more activated, and it turned that space into something that was very relevant. There was no data collection. We didn't care who you were. There was no measurement of it in the sense that we were trying to understand which demographics were there. It simply was focused on fixing a challenge that people
Mm.
have. I think if you look at any ticker installation that's in any corporate space, it's interesting because it's an unusual shape. And
You talking about like an RSS feed, like a text
right,
ticker?
right.
Hmm.
So something where you've got content flying across, and I always think they're really interesting. I think people have got a cultural reference of the stock market to that.
Yeah,
Uh,
100%.
and I think they expect it to be live because it's a ticker.
Hmm.
And because they're expecting it to be live and embedded in that space, it becomes relevant to that space that it's in. And where you can use that to your advantage is by blending real-time data, whether it's news or weather or traffic status, with corporate messaging. And
Hmm.
the veracity of the messaging that it's around amplifies the messaging that you're choosing to put up there of your own.
Yeah.
And it's less, a stodgy corporate feed. It's more a dynamic, live, relevant, contextual feed that
Yeah.
has meaning to me now. And I think because if you do that on a 16 by 9 screen, it's fine. But if you do that in something that's a different shape, it's exciting and interesting, and
Right.
even better if it's embedded into the space.
That's interesting. I spoke to Jenny Hicks a little while ago from Midwich, and she kind of emulated very similar statements where we're constantly trying to now push the boundaries because 16 by 9 is such a factory default.
Mhm.
And even steering clear of that, and I know there's some really good providers out there that do kind of custom shapes and designs, and I've even seen circular screens turn up now. It's just like anything to make the screen itself become secondary in the story. And it's kind of, why would you have this shape? Well, I've got a ticker, then I'm going to have a long and thin screen because why would I need to utilize the rest of the space? And I think you mentioned something there that I wanted to just go back on that was really fascinating because you're not picking up any data from this floor design for IKEA. It's just about making the customer experience right. That's the priority, right? It's who's going to be contextually watching or interacting or engaging with that technology and what value are they going to pull from it. And it leads me to think about the grand variety of different technologies there are out there right now in terms of their capability and how in depth they go with data analysis and all this kind of stuff, and the different levels that different corporations are at right now. Businesses in general, you've got some retail spaces, some corporate spaces where putting a screen in store for the first time is their biggest revolution. And then you've got others that are so far beyond that, where they are, they've been doing that for years and they're used to that. And they're now looking at the next level. Like, what else could we do? What else could we pull from this value? And that tends to be where data comes in. And I think that ties in nicely with what you were mentioning as well, which is about that customer journey. How long do you have in front of the screen? How much time do you have until you can to deliver that message? One of the things that you mentioned in this was around, before we got on the call, was about buildings and materials. And I have no idea about this. I'm sure that anybody starting with digital signage for the first time doesn't have a clue what's going to trip them up when it comes down the road of, I didn't think about that. We've reinstalled the head office here, and I had a couple of those snafus, but nothing at that kind of scale. Is there a particular set of questions or things that you ask people to start thinking about early on when it comes to their site and their location that they should bear in mind?
It depends on the project, of course, and it depends on the scale of the project. But even simple things like, can we recess the screens into the wall space so that they're flush and it just looks better. It looks better. It's neater. It's a cleaner look. You need to think about air movement. You need to think about finger gaps to retrieve the screen out for maintenance and other things. When it comes to LED, you're talking about mounting and fixing points and maintenance and front and rear maintenance and the locations for media players and whether you're going to use signal distribution. And whenever you're thinking about any of these installations with a project that's underway, you're working with a general contractor normally who will want drawings. They'll want to understand how you're going to interface with their fire seals or the exterior seals if you're in that sort of space, or which riser you're going to be using and how you're going to mount it and all the fixing points that you'd need. And it's really important to have an understanding of that and to get the right advice, because the worst case scenario is these things fall off the wall, of course,
Right.
and then you're in a real world of pain.
Right.
But more to the point, you want it to look amazing, and it needs to be installed properly, and you need flat surfaces for LED ideally, or you're in a much more complicated configuration space.
Right.
And having in our team, in the group, we have structural engineers, we've got designers, and CAD drawings are more and more part of the daily conversation that we're having in these projects, because it goes back to your interview with Midwich, a comment there about 16:9 screens. When we put digital menus in 2012 into a QSR or fast casual restaurant, it was amazing. It was, brand new technology. It looked
Right.
incredible, and it was breaking boundaries, and et cetera, et cetera. The truth is, if it hasn't got a digital screen now, then it's probably not a very meaningful brand, and they're not maximizing the potential that is so clearly, obviously there. So you expect to see 16:9 screens and the associated content. The problem with that, of course, is that it reduces the impact, because we're now more and more numbed to the effects of digital. Even a portrait poster in the underground now doesn't have the impact it used to have, because you expect to see it.
Yeah.
So the use of large format is definitely there, definitely an important trend. The use of creative formats is another trend. So transparent LED, glass LED, various technologies around it. And then also shapes, so columns, spheres, squares, the variety of different geometric shapes that you can build and 3D shapes that you can build, and then the content that goes on those. Because ultimately, if you're going to grab attention for whatever it is you're doing, you really do need to change the way that you're presenting it. So that
Yeah.
means then you're working in a space where suddenly it's not a screen with a standard bracket being hung on a wall, which is quite easy. The hang and bang adage stands true there. This is
Yeah. Unless I try and do it, then it's still hard.
I've never been that successful with a screwdriver or a drill. The reality is you need to use the building now, and now we need to understand what steel structures we have in place, and what the loadings are, and what the wind shear is if it's external. And there's actually quite a lot of things to think about. And the earlier you do it, the better.
Right.
So, and to your point, this is a learning journey for everyone all the time, and there's repeated certification you have to have, and an understanding of the changes in legislation and the building regulations and codes, etc. So we spend quite a bit of time doing that sort of thing,
Mm.
and also then trying to map it to a meaningful content journey that's fun and engaging and interesting, that then once it's all installed makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's not something that happens very, very quickly.
No. No, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more on that point. One of the things we spoke about briefly when we were doing our initial call was you said put yourself in the place. And that stuck with me because I thought it was a really interesting kind of almost so obvious that people miss it kind of situation. And I think there's a lot of times, especially when we're speaking to solutions architects or speaking to, people behind the scenes that are set to help configure something, and they're never actually in the space that digital signage is going to exist. So do you feel like it's really imperative to whoever, let's say we're talking the individual that's been tasked with, hey, we want you to go and invest in digital signage. We either have an old setup that we want to upgrade, or this is our first time looking at it. Is your kind of advice to really go and sit wherever those screens are going to be and just absorb that space? Does that help?
Enormously, massively, really important. You can't often do it at the time that you're talking about it because it doesn't physically exist. It'll be a shell that's got no walls and no flooring,
Right.
no ceiling. And by the time they have, you're going to be installing it because it will
Mm-hmm.
open 3 weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
The late, great James Fine of Telecine in Canada showed me some amazing concepts work that he used to do, and I'm sure the team still do, where they would build using LCD technology,
Mm-hmm.
mini mock-ups of the spaces, and they would
Yeah.
map the content in tiny form to those
Yeah.
spaces. And I always thought that was an amazingly brilliant idea, because the biggest challenge we have is helping our clients visualize what it's going to look like at the end,
Right.
and getting them to understand why the content, which can sometimes be quite complex and therefore expensive, is worth doing in the way it's done, because it will have impact. And so getting them to the place where they understand they've got to do that, and we need 3 months to do it, and this
Yeah.
is what the kit's going to look like, and this is how it'll be installed.
Mm.
You either do that, physically, like James did, or you do it, using 3D technology and VR
Mm.
headsets.
You've let me. I was sitting here waiting. I was like, I'm going to ask him. I'm going to ask him about this. Do you think VR is going to help in that kind of
It
solution?
definitely
Then?
does. It definitely
Yeah.
does. It puts you in the place, and that's true.
Mm.
And I guess that is the modern way of doing it with the box mini sort of
Yeah.
um,
Well, I did a video not that long ago actually in here where I have a Meta Quest 3, so it has the transparency. So kind of like
yeah, it's fantastic. It's a really great
poor man's Apple Vision or
it's
whatever
a
it
really
is.
great
But
headset, and
it's fantastic.
it's a eighth of the cost of the Apple headset, and actually, it does all the things you want it to do.
The I could go and divulge into a whole price difference, but I won't. But what we did is we had the Signage Live, so the CMS portion, running as a broadcast player. So it runs as a player that just runs
Cool.
through a web browser. So I had a situation where to the left of me was a physical screen, and to the right of me was a non-physical screen, for lack of a better word. So they stood next to each other. It was running exactly the same content, and I could walk into a building. I do genuinely think there is a future where some of it is physical and some of it is just digital, and you almost have this then we'll be talking about the convergence of content across two different platforms, like the meta and the physical.
Hey, listen, we're doing it in Kuwait. We're doing it with one of the car manufacturers. We work with luxury manufacturers, and it's a museum, and they've got digital assets, and there's exactly that, a MetaQuest headset that you put on, and you can put yourself in the Nürburgring, and you can see the engines coming out of the vehicles, and
Yeah.
snow and alpine, and it's mixed with scent. And that's the value of place, really.
Yes. Right.
You're in a space. It's a bit like, going and having an off-site meeting, and the value of that. I mean, the logic of the destination retail experience, or museum experience, or physical car dealership, is that you have an experience that is unlike any you can have any other way.
Yeah.
You can definitely look online. You can order your Tesla or your Porsche or your whatever online, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't smell it. and you can't
No.
feel it, and you can't touch the stitching and feel the steering wheel and sit in it and feel how it grips you and
Yeah.
etc. Um, I'm not that much of a car guy. I sound like I love cars there, but
Yeah, you did, but you did a really convincing job with it. I think it's and there's two different sides to this, right? There's that kind of I'm selling luxury item A, and it's 100x the cost of
right.
a Casio watch I go buy off the street. So there's the value you've got to put in there to make the product, the brand product, kind of align with that. And then you've got this kind of mass market piece as well, where we're talking like corporate spaces or train stations or airports or all these places where they become a lot less. They're a lot less about trying to sell you something and they're just trying to inform you about something. But I don't think the narrative changes necessarily because you're still trying to engage and interact and you're still trying to add value. And we're seeing more and more these kind of companies that you would be surprised to see spend a good amount of time, not financially, but just from like a thought process of how are we going to introduce this?
I mean, the challenges, right? The trends, let's say that you've got at the moment, whether it's hyper personalization
Mm,
or luxury experiences, or even the challenges that people have got around staff actually in the
hmm.
assisted or staffless spaces.
Yeah.
Those play to the outcomes that we're looking to engage with. So
Hmm.
whether it's to improve dwell time or whether we're looking for more engagement from customers or staff or visitors, or we're in a sort of digital transformation sort of space that requires
Hmm.
more innovation. They're then fed into the markets that need it. So whether it's retail or automotive or anything else. And for me, digital, and that doesn't mean a 16:9 screen on a wall per se. It
Hmm.
means the ability to change the messaging and make it appropriate wherever it needs to be. But
Yeah.
if I'm looking for a luxury experience, it needs to feel like it's a bit focused around what my needs are as a customer in that space. And that might be a Gucci or a Chanel, or it might be a Porsche, or it might be something a little more Tesco orientated or
Right.
Sainsbury's.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be a luxury brand, but that personalized luxury experience is something that's still achievable
Mm,
through the clever use of digital technology in spaces, making sure that the content is targeted at that right space using
mm,
signage live and personalization opportunities that you've got with the data and
mm,
other tools, but making it relevant in that space is really important. And that's why video walls are on the way out. That's why
mm.
they're now a pretty defunct technology. You just don't see that many new video walls going in because
Interesting.
it's a tiled 16:9 screen and you can
Mm,
see it. So there's nothing particularly exciting about a tiled 16:9 screen. There is something exciting about a curved LED that maps to a building. That's exciting.
yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, you guys saw it as well, of course. That ISE,
Yeah.
the large transparent LED that was in the building as you walked up
Hmm.
to it, and every day was a bit different. It's great,
It
and there's
was
lots
really
of
cool.
ways you could do that, but it was well done, wasn't it? It was an
Yeah.
implementation that was well done, and it's great to see it because we all should be striving to deliver exciting, interesting, and specific digital experiences in the spaces that we work in to
Yeah.
make sure that digital is relevant and not
Hmm.
just a tack on because it is something that people think looks good.
No, absolutely. I had two more questions for you that I had listed here that I wanted to ask you about. And these are more kind of thought provoking future questions more than
Oh,
anything
well,
too real.
okay.
So you won't be held accountable, if you're wrong in these answers. But the landscape of digital signage has changed quite dramatically over the past 5 years, 10 years. What do you think the next 5 years is going to bring?
That's my brain working. Can you hear it?
I can cut that bit out and we can just like condense it down. But do you feel like we're going to see an increase in LED, which I know is coming up a lot more in these fine pixel ratios or pixel densities, whatever the term is, or do you think is a market growing for that kind of thing? What's your thoughts around that?
I think there's a number of facets to that question.
Mm,
So from a technology perspective, I think you'll see a continuity of operational digital signage solutions.
mm-hmm.
I hope we will see a better and more informed customer base who understand where we are today,
Mm.
and we don't keep going round and round. I think that there's currently a bit of an issue with, we are actually quite far down the road, and there's some old mistakes that keep getting made, I think, by big brands, and we need to avoid that and move on.
Mm.
I think data will become more and more important,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think I don't think AI is going to transform the space in the way that people maybe think it is. The
Mm.
reason is I think there's only a certain amount of creative that can be done by AI that is meaningful. I think
Mm.
ultimately there's still a great need for a curated experience. So
Right.
I think you'll never replace it, but it'll be a collaboration. There'll be a collaboration with AI that
Mm.
makes things more interesting and more relevant. And that's great. I think that's a really good thing, positive outcome. I think the move towards LED will be relentless and
Mm.
will result in better, brighter, longer lasting, and more efficient digital solutions.
Mm.
And I think that we'll see more exciting and more widespread implementations. I don't think it'll be Blade Runner just yet, but we're not far off it. We
All right, fine.
it's been the mission to help that happen, but in the right way, and to turn the spaces into more relevant spaces for everybody.
Mm.
I'd like to see a better understanding of the values that all of the ecosystem brings to the implementation of physical spaces, and making them
Mm.
better and more relevant. I think the industry has a little more work to do to help show what that value is. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's seen as a commodity, and
Right.
it's a screen, and so we just put a screen in. Whereas you wouldn't do the same thing with an architect. You wouldn't do the same thing
Right.
with a building contractor.
Mm-hmm.
There's values that we need to be clearer about. I think hopefully in 10 years' time we'll have an even more widespread adoption of digital solutions, and
Mm.
perhaps a little bit more consolidation around how they're done, and
Yeah.
a little bit more agreement around the standards and expectations of what should be done. Less JPEGs and videos, more HTML would be great.
Mm.
And that's how we then feed in AI or data driven logic into all of the surfaces that are out there in the field.
Interesting. Well, actually, you covered my second question in that because I was going to ask you about AI. So I think that really kind of condenses, but I can't add anything more onto that. I think, yeah, that's all of those things that you've mentioned. Some of them are in their infancy. And as you say, some of them are almost, they've been around for a long time. And it's still a surprise when it comes up. We go, surely we've developed past this. And I think that's a testament to how widespread the technological advancements of certain businesses are versus others. Some people are, even like longer standing businesses that are really successful just have not implemented as much technology or is not as familiar with that technological implementation as you would expect them to be. And then there are others, newer companies typically, that have really, they get it and they grasp it and they come in with like a mind vision board and they know exactly what they want to deliver and they just go and deliver it. So that's really insightful. Peter, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you?
We can be contacted at trison.uk on the web, and Trison UK on all of the social media channels.
Perfect. Well, again, if you've any other subjects we want to talk about, I'd love to have you back on again. But thank you so much for taking the time today.
Tim, it's been a great pleasure. And as you know, I'm a great fan of this, and it's been really exciting to be part of it. Thank you for inviting me.
It's awesome. Thank you so much. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.